this computer, and we will get started. So, as we do every morning, Michael, I struggle to get PowerPoint going.
Oh, I see it.
All right, now let's see if I can go to slideshow mode. And I think we have started.
Oh my goodness, look at that.
All right. So we were going to start by congratulating everyone on such a great job with that last assignment. Mike and I were very impressed. Of course, there's only two of you in the call this morning, so you two can receive the brunt of the kudos for really diving into that assignment. Oh, here's Brittany. We really saw the effort that went into. Oh, and now Talis is here too. I got to start it all. Now I've got to start all over again.
Yeah, we've got to rewind.
We got to rewind and start all over again with the congratulations on doing such a good job with that second assignment. We went through them all. We're like, there were some fantastic ideas, and quite a few of them. We're like, geez, we could actually see, I can't speak for you, Mike, but I could visualize how they were working and how they would be successful and a heck of a lot of fun for the different visitors that you were that you had sort of targeted in terms of who you wanted to come. So really well done.
Great. They were very creative, and they were very well thought out.
It certainly makes marking easy when you're actually really enjoying the content that's been written and seeing the to Mike's point, the creativity come out and get put down on the page. Okay, so before your heads get all too swollen, we'll stop there with the kudos, and we'll dive right into week 11.
Week 11. Can you believe that?
I know. Oh, just before we go on, we are thinking, so our last class is December the 15th, and you don't need to make any decisions now, but I think that it would be very cool if on December the 15th we actually got together in a class at Durham College and do our last class in person. And like I said, Mike and I will bring all the coffee and donuts, and I get to actually meet you people in person. We've enjoyed teaching you from afar. It would be great to put some faces to the names and just sort of do a last class summary of all the things. So we'll send out an email. I'll send out emails to everyone and see who might be able to make it, because I know a lot of you might have other work, might have conflicts, might not be close by, but if we can get at least the majority of people in, that would be awesome. And with that, now Mike, you ready?
All right. Okay. So we're gonna carry on our little journey here, right? So last week we looked at those industry organizations and associations and all that stuff, and just how they kind of they play into the sort of greater industry, right? And what benefits they hold, or how attractions kind of use those sort of groups to better their operations. And we looked at how they would things like the ASTM and how they sort of work on standards development, sort of product development type of stuff, where the IAPA we looked at, where they play a dual role in sort of connecting people or in industry to vendors or people that would supply them, or for training roles, that kind of stuff. And just how how operators are smart to leverage those benefits, right? And just sort of improve their operation. We talked about how GlowZone and how Chuck used IAPA sort of as when they went shopping, basically, right, to look for ideas and to make their attraction more appealing or more profitable. So so that was last week, and I think we had a good discussion on that. If there's any questions or anything, let us know in the chat. If anything from last week or any observations or things that you kind of thought about afterwards. But yeah, that's basically where we were. So this week, what we wanted to do is kind of tie some of these things together, because in the last few weeks we've talked about the TSSA, we've talked about ASTM, we've talked about all these different organizations and things like that, and now we're kind of getting down to the sort of boots on the ground sort of part of things, where we kind of want to put that, tie that bow up and show how kind of how at the attractions level that an operator needs to start sort of thinking about these things, or applying some of the sort of knowledge or experience or expertise that goes on outside of them, and bring it in. And that sort of starts us with the topic of risk management. And I put up a fairly long definition here of risk management. I think it applies. So, it talks about risk management is the process of identifying, assessing, and controlling threats to an organization's capital and earnings. So that's, it's quite a mouthful, but, they stem from a variety of sources, including financial uncertainties, legal liabilities, technology issues, strategic management errors, accidents, natural disasters, basically anything you can think of. That, if you look at it instead of once you kind of open the gates to your attraction, then you also invite in a number of ways in which it all can go wrong. and that, that as an operations, sort of manager, or, sort of professional in the industry, that is the largest part of your sort of thinking all the time, is how to manage those elements of risk. And sometimes they're more obvious, and sometimes they're not, and so you have to look at all those sources of where it comes from, and what strategies you employ on a daily basis to limit those things, and make sure that you don't have to sort of face those issues, because in the end, risk can come in a different ways, but the consequences are usually always financial, or they can be personal in terms of injury or loss, and they can certainly affect your business. And like we've said many a times, I mean, this is not a not-for-profit venture, so you are certainly looking to sort of mitigate those things so that you can be as successful as possible. So,
I wonder if Linda is related to Stanley.
Who knows? We'll
Jeez.
never know.
Stanley Tucci.
She's famous.
One of the best actors out there. All right,
Yeah.
Continue on. Sorry, Mike. I'm going to be playing the role of comic relief today, and
you're on fire. The coffee's kicking in.
At least I'm going to think I'm funny.
Well, there you go. Well, as long as it's as long as you can walk away from your desk at the end of this, feel satisfied. Then
that's right. That's right.
Okay, so we've kind of broken it down to some of the common risk categories in the attractions industry, and there are certainly lots of them. I think we'll try to do sort of break them down into some sort of easily definable groups, and then we're gonna hop on a Padlet and sort of talk a little bit about this further. But when we look at the types of risk categories that you're going to face as an operator, the first one and the most obvious one is safety, right? So, and as I mentioned before, as soon as you invite members of the public into a facility, then you've opened up the door for, risk in terms of safety. And that could be as simple as, trips and falls, or some those kinds of types of things, all the way to sort of the more sort of, I'll say sort of talked about sort of media grabbing onto accidents, failures, those kinds of things, but they kind of run the gamut of all kinds of stuff. And it's easy to focus on the big ones, obviously, in terms of as an operator, that you're operating these very heavy machines, and you can think about an example like a large amusement park, that the rides on that they're operating are fairly complex, and they keep getting bigger, faster, all that kind of stuff. So there are obvious risks involved in that have to be controlled, because you're not going to launch people at 100 miles an hour and not think about what risks are involved in doing that. But it gets even simpler than that, to things like, uneven surfaces, or slipping, wet floors, yeah, all that kind of stuff. So you move on from there. So we're going to look at that. Reputational risks, especially in the online era. You get, obviously you get your Google reviews, your Yelp reviews, your this reviews, all that kind of stuff. So, reputationally, you face a lot of risks, just by, having people sort of, put up their opinions of you on the internet. And that obviously affects people's buying decisions, and whether they're going to come to your attractions, and things like that. And your public image is very important in terms of the operation. One of the examples that at Wet and Wild, when we were building it out, we really wanted to stick to a very family image. So and the park that preceded them, at Wildwater Kingdom, didn't exactly have a family reputation, because they went into a lot of ventures that were were more adult in nature, whether they were concerts or overnight, festivals and raves and things like that. And that, that's fine. That was what they wanted to do. But, in terms of, that park, we wanted to be more family. So a lot of what we did, or how we managed our image, was based on that. And there's always a risk to that, because, if you fail to deliver, or if you have incidents that happen, then same thing, right? People's buying decisions are going to be altered by, what you get there. There are certainly environmental risks in the business, and especially true for outdoor attractions. And the examples I put up here. So,
Michael,
some of their models require. Am I here?
Yeah, you weren't. So you need to start back at environmental risk.
Okay. So
unless it was just me that froze.
No, it said here my internet connection was unstable, so who knows what was going on there. So, all right. So environmental risk. So yeah, you face all kinds of those things, and some of these are not controllable entities, but they're things that you have to manage. And it talks about outdoor attractions is obviously an obvious example of where environmental factors are a risk. When you look at things like a water park, my example there, that you operate in the summer, you're a seasonal business, you have let's say 3 months to make all your money, and let's say it's the coldest, wettest summer in 30 years. That's definitely an environmental risk, and you're not going to be as successful as you want it to be in terms of those type of conditions. And I remember back in the Ontario Place days, where we would talk about expansion to the water park, and the government who owned the park was very much, I'll say, the government is the most risk adverse entity on the planet, and they do not like taking risks, because they're very high profile, and obviously the media gets all over them, right? So in terms of business risk, the question that would always come up is, if we did this, what happens if the weather's bad? And that's a risk. And or if you're a ski operator and it doesn't snow over the peak period, so the Christmas break and the March break, it's warm and it's wet, then you're not going to be very successful in terms of your business, because you're dependent on a certain thing. And you can kind of look at a lot of seasonal industries that just
he's frozen again. Jeez.
depend on the weather being just right.
Stop. You got to go back to seasonal.
Am I back?
Yeah, you're back, but you cut out.
What is going on here?
You cut out at seasonal.
Seasonal, huh? All right. Well, I'm having a tough day here, internet wise. I don't know why.
Where are you? You're in the boonies or something? What's going on?
Yeah. Well, I'm right now. I'm doing this from the rest stop on the 400 near the bathroom. It's virtual background. All right, well, bear with me. I don't know what's going on with my internet today, but yeah, seasonal industries, they depend on a certain type of weather, right? Sometimes, and that can be definitely an environmental risk that or given all that's in the media these days about climate change, and you can see what's going on the West Coast in terms of the weather that they just went through, that those are risks that factor into your business. And could be could be flooding, it could be, you name it, storms. I dealt with a water park, in Houston, who got, affected by a hurricane, and they got flooded, and it took them, a substantial amount of time to rebuild and retool. So they lost a season because of that. And obviously for their owners, that was a fairly large financial hit. And that sort of factors into your environmental risks as well. And lastly, financial risk. So, you need to be profitable, and there's no guarantee of that happening. There's much like any other business, attractions sometimes come and go because they just don't succeed. And, there's a lot of variables to profitability. Some of it's, could be about just your revenue is not there, or maybe you're poorly managed and you're not managing your expenses properly or efficiently. And so you're just sort of bleeding money out. But there's a lot of risk to that. And sometimes financial risk can be just, sort of from liabilities or penalties or, claims and things like that you have to pay out because of other risks that occurred. So,
yeah, for the fastest way to financial risk is by not mitigating the top three, right? So that's sort of a good sign that you're not going to be overly successful. Okay, so I have to do this. That up.
all right. So,
Give me a second. We're almost there,
yep.
I think.
This is not going to be our best technical presentation today. So
No. All right. Are you seeing? What are we seeing now?
I'm seeing your Padlet now.
Oh, well, that worked out well. Okay, so let me hit the share, and I'm going to put the link in
the chat.
And let's get everyone onto the Padlet. Okay.
All right.
Okay.
So,
don't worry. We're going to kick this into high gear today and get you all awake. We seem to be we're struggling today, Michael. I don't know what it is.
I'm going to put an entry in my diary. Dear diary, today's class was a struggle.
Well, it's because we went through the deck last night, and we're like, this is going to be awesome. So
yeah,
don't worry. We'll get there. All right.
Yeah, it's a lot of surprise turns and stuff coming up. So
all right.
No. So all right. So on this Padlet, what we're looking for is these are the four types of sort of classes of risks that we just sort of laid out for the class. And what we're looking for is what are some of the ways that an attraction can mitigate risks under each of these four categories. For example, so there's where Chuck put out wet floor signs. So that's a way that you can mitigate that. And so look at each one of those and let's start to put down some ideas of how you think attractions, go about mitigating these potential risks to their business. If that doesn't make sense, raise your hand or ask a question. And yeah, so we'll go ahead and just start populating some stuff into here. Yeah.
You guys are doing good. So we've got things like staff training and health and safety, maintenance checkups, perfect. Communicate health and safety policies to everyone. It's a good idea. Make sure that everyone knows. Following health protocols. I put one up there. If you know someone's having a good time, ask them for a review. That helps with your reputation.
Absolutely.
Don't ask the people who are mad. They're going to do it anyway. But try and get everyone else to do it. When it comes to that kind of reputational thing, when you think about it, people are, yep, Talus, good. People are more prone to leave a negative review because they didn't have a good time than they are to leave a good review because they expected to have a good time. So if they expected to have a good time and they had a good time, then really their expectations have been met, and they're like, well, okay, and they don't think to write a review. But if they had a really bad time, that's when they'll leave their review. So, you know, your two choices are you go above and beyond, and people are blown away and feel compelled because you exceeded their expectations, and they feel compelled to write a review or leave a review, or you actually ask people, did you have a did you have a good time? Write a review, and that is a good one. So address negative reviews immediately and positively, and focus on staff service training. Yes. Rainy day plan. That's a good one. Budgeting and forecasting, regular financial situation assessments. That's a good one. Yeah, start planning it out. Be able and ready to cover a loss. Yep, backup plans. Alternatives. Mike, are you anonymous today, Mike, or is this someone else?
I'm always anonymous.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I'm sure there's lots more.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. So provide side non-essential activities. Mike was saying that we can, what do they do at Disney in Florida, Mike?
So yeah, I mean, Disney World in Orlando is a great example of how to manage environmental risk, because I don't how many of you have been to Florida in the summertime, but the weather is two kinds of ways in Florida. It's either hot
and sticky
or raining. Yeah, hot and sticky, or it's raining. But the rain in Florida it's not an all day rain kind of thing. They're more like it's almost like clockwork that you're gonna have an afternoon thunderstorm because of the weather that they have there. So, when you look at it, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to build an outdoor amusement park in an environment that rains as much as it does. But what Disney, did, or has sort of managed that is that a lot of their shows and productions and stuff are in indoor facilities, and their schedule tends to actually revolve around when they're most likely to get those storms. So, guests on their midways and their concourses have an option. If it's going to start to rain, then you can go inside and see a show. And they're just, as I mentioned, they're just conveniently placed in a time where they have more likelihood of getting sort of rained on, so you can avoid it. And there's been a few times where I've gone to Disney and gone in to see a show, and when I walked out, the sidewalks are all wet, and they weren't when you went in, and you're like, what happened? Did I miss something? And it didn't affect your day at all, but it certainly did rain. Hold on, cat.
Yeah. And even Wonderland, you look at when their shows are, they've got quite a few indoor shows spread throughout the park, so that people can quickly duck under cover if they require it for any particular reason, whether there's a thunderstorm or just rain that or any other type of weather that comes in suddenly. Oh, I like this: a strong workplace culture, and happy employees. Yeah, these are all things, because you're right. Reputation can also be ruined by bad press from suits that are launched by staff, right? Or staff exposés on stuff that's been going on. Start on enterprise design. Yes, that is true. At Glowzone, I think we talked about this before, but at Glowzone, it wasn't a bad reputation. but we were getting a reputation that we were a place only for kids. And that was because our birthday parties were so popular that at 10 o'clock on a Friday and Saturday night, there was still a bunch of 8-year-olds running around at birthday parties, because that's the only time parents could get their parties in. And it didn't affect us financially on the weekends, but it certainly affected us financially Monday through Thursday, when in the evenings we rely on the older crowd, dates, people, friends that are coming out and people on dates to come out, because they weren't coming out because all they've heard is that we're for kids. And we actually had to make a conscious effort to to communicate and target those audiences, to let them know that it was a great place to bring your date or bring your group of friends, and went out of our way. Now, another environmental thing that actually helped us, besides being closed for the 18 months that we were closed, COVID helped us with that, because there was so much pent up demand, especially in that 18 to 30, or 16 to 30-year-old age demographic, who were just jonesing to see their friends again and just get out and do anything, that we've actually gained that audience back in droves at a time when our birthday parties are still struggling, because parents are still concerned about letting their kids go to these parties where they're going to be unmasked and eating food in close contact. So it's helped us along, but a lot of it had to do with how much mitigation we did to fix our reputation during the high times in 2018, 2019. Solid marketing and partnership. Yep. What else we got down here? Insurance. Yes, insurance is key. And it is also probably one of the reasons that all of the provincial attractions are so cautious, because the government doesn't hold insurance. So basically, every time the government is sued and lost, it's just your money that goes to pay whoever they lost to, right? Just tax dollars.
Yeah. They're an interesting, because the government doesn't have to have insurance. They insure themselves, because they're the only business in the province, in the country, that I guess we'll say has a 99% guarantee that it's not going to go under. I say the 1%, because who knows, right?
That's right. Stranger things have happened.
Sorry, if the revolution takes place, then I guess all bets are off. But the Ontario government's not going anywhere. So if their financial situation is dire, then they have other tools that they can use to get money. And that would flow down to their attractions. But if you're a private operator, then you don't have such luxury, right? So
So sorry. Now, if I'm rereading yours about the side non-seasonal activities, are you thinking about mitigating to do things that extend the season, kind of like a Wonderland did, by adding in like the haunted, their haunted event and the winter event?
No, it's the same idea as you mentioned in Florida. So like have something for the people to know in case of excessive weather. So for example, I had this experience in Switzerland, where when it was stormy, people again will be like, let's say in the inside, they have a lot of other things to do inside the like a kind of the mountain, to have like a 3D shows, 4D shows, like food and beverage, etc., until the storm calmed down a little bit.
Okay. All right. So it's a little bit what we're talking about. Okay. Although, so then with that, we should add in is you do things to extend your season if you're seasonal. So I'll put that in, because that is, well, it both mitigates some risk, but it also creates new risk, right? So Wonderland, they've got their Winterfest going on right now, which does extend their season, which could extend their profitability. If they had a crappy summer, they could then bank on having this event. But if they had a crappy summer and then a crappy winter, it's going to be difficult, and could actually put them in deeper financial trouble. That's not what happened, but I just, CCT systems, auditing, so internal and third party. What is that yours, Mike, or is that someone else's? So what do you mean by that?
Oh, well, a great example is in the water park industry, where we talked last week about like those ENA and different agencies that provide lifeguard training and protocol and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of what happens in the water park industry is that they self-audit themselves. So as a water park operator, we had a standard that we wanted to set in terms of, our guard performance. There were things like scan times and recognition and safety auditing. So we would actually have staff that would go into the park and watch the operation and score it. And we had basically a scorecard that sort of had all the metrics that we were looking for. And then at the end of that sort of process, whether it was a whole day or a couple hours, we could get a score. And that's something that you could use to talk to leaders in those departments about how they did. And that sort of, it was a way to reaffirm that you're doing what you say you're doing. Then part of that process, though, is that if you use something like ENA, they're going to send people down to your park as part of your sort of client agreement. They're going to send people down unannounced, and they're going to audit your park and make sure that you are following the training and that your guards are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And it wasn't meant to be a scare tactic. It's always meant to be something to let's just make sure that we're doing this right. And so they'd come down, they'd spend a whole day in your park. And then they'd announce themselves to you, sometime in the afternoon. They'd go up to a guest service window or something and say, hey, we're here for this, and can you contact your operations manager? And you'd go down and they would run you through it, and they would record things, and it was all confidential. So one of the things you have to be careful about with those audits and different scorecards is we never kept, or they never gave you the full record of what was going on there, not because they didn't want to, but because anytime you had a record of something, then it was discoverable. So you're always going to find something discoverable. I mean, in like litigation. So if something happened, any piece of documentation that you have is usually is what's called part of discovery. So if the other lawyer asks for any records that you have, then you're going to have to submit them. And it wasn't a way to subvert that. It was just that any audit you do, you're going to find areas for improvement, because that's the point of the audit. And you didn't necessarily want that to be used against you at some level, because maybe a guard made a mistake, and someone on the other side could twist that to say that your guards always make mistakes. So they would show you the results but never give them to you as a paper copy. So if they wanted, but anyway, the point of the whole process was just to give you, you spent your preseason and maybe your in-service trainings going through these processes, this training, going through that. And now you just want to be able to check to make sure that you're doing what you said you would do, or that your staff are following the training. And, if they're not, then what is the reason for it, right? Is it that they don't understand it, or that, maybe that they, you have lax controls, or your supervision's not quite right. The rides industry does that as well. When we looked at the IROC program, the International Ride Operator Certification, naturally, because they were kind of born out of that that sort of same idea for the water park world, then you have this the same process where they send someone in and they kind of just check to see if your operators are holding that standard, right, in terms of what you're what you expect in terms of that. So that's what I mean by that auditing.
Okay.
So it sort of adds to your layer of safety, because you've got someone else coming in to kind of tell you whether or not you're doing it right, or if you're making some mistakes.
Yeah. And then I like this one, to do the research on new product ideas as a financial one. And when we were developing the concept of what GlowZone was going to be, we looked at we knew we wanted to be multi-attraction, but we weren't sure. We knew mini golf was going to be one of them, because we all had experience in the mini golf industry, but we were trying to figure out what the second or third attractions were going to be. And we did a bunch of research. At one point, we were thinking of doing a a high ropes course above the mini golf course. And that's something that we've seen. I've seen it in many places. Myrtle Beach, they've got that in a Myrtle Beach location. The Toronto Zoo now has this high ropes course over, next to one of the exhibits, and we did a cost benefit type of analysis, and it's going to cost us, I think it was like $250,000, $300,000 to put one in, and then we had to start layering in. Well, what's the hang time? What's our throughput? Like, how many people can we put through on this high ropes course? How do we operationalize it? How many staff are going to have to be up there with the people? And we determined it was too much financial risk to do it. We didn't think we were going to get the ROI, and that's where we landed on the laser tag, because we figured, here's something that you can get 75 people through an hour at maximum, and we set a price, and there's limited staff time. One staff can run a game, and that ended up being what we went with, because we did sort of a financial risk management assessment of it. Plus we did some research to make sure that there, not a lot of litigation, that sort of stuff. So it was a process whenever you're building something out.
Yeah, and there certainly in the industry, I mean, as in every industry, there are volumes of plans and ideas and documents that a business will create that will never see the light of day, because it's determined somewhere along the line that it's not, it doesn't meet the all the criteria for the park. And that it could be that it's, as Chuck said, it's not profitable, or it's not going to generate the revenue that you hope, or that there are too many risks involved in terms of safety, or too many things to control. I could think of just in all the parks that I've been at, the number of times we've kind of had a draft plan, or even hired a third party to do a design and analysis for us of something, and all it ended up being is a paper exercise at the end, that there was an idea that we were going to do this, and it just never came to fruition because of a whole number of circumstances. And a lot of times it just comes down to, when you go through your risk process, or I think most of you heard of the SWOT analysis, where you kind of go through the benefits and the risks and all that kind of stuff, right? The strategies that you look at it and say, it's just not worth doing at this point in time for whatever reason, and it could tick a number of boxes, right?
Yeah. Well, and if you're doing your research, you find out that it breaks down all the time. Well, then you've got the downtime on it. You've got so that's cost you money. But it does, in that people can't ride it, so they're not paying to go on it. And there could be the maintenance costs and all those sort of things. So it's kind of like when you buy a new car. No one just goes to buy a new car. Most people do a little bit of research and find out what's the longevity. And then there are people out there who know that it's going to be a clunker eventually, but they like it, so they buy it anyway. And that's fine.
How Wonderland ended up with the Tomb Raider ride, or whatever that thing is.
Oh, was that the 3D theater? Which one is the Tomb Raider?
That horrible lie down roller coaster thing.
Oh, okay.
I don't know what they call it now, the flight of something or whatever. You lie down. If you've been on it, you've only been on it once, because you got off it and decided that you never wanted to do it again. But that's a story for another day. But then that's where we did spend all of that time.
I think we got time. It's a story for right now. Mike, go ahead.
So it's a roller coaster built by a company called Zamperla, which is an Italian company, and their specialty isn't quite roller coasters. It's more like children's spinny rides. So a lot of what you see in the kids area there is actually built by a company like Zamperla or similar. And this one it's a story of, I will say, marketing winning over operations and maintenance in terms of a decision on building a product. And really what it came down to was, from an operations and maintenance standpoint, we weren't really hearing a lot of good things. There were a few operators of it globally, and we knew them and we talked to them. I would say it wasn't a risky venture in terms of like, safety or anything else like that. It was just really cumbersome, and it wasn't, it's not the best ride in the park, that's for sure. But, it was just difficult to maintain. It was going to be just going to be a real pain in the butt. And, so when the idea was floated, it was, all the departments kind of have, I'll say, some say in kind of just putting forward, that sort of the highest level of department. So operations, VP and all that sort of culminates all their information. And then when they're sitting in their sort of, that level of meeting, then they can kind of say, well, here are the things that, this department said. And in the end, marketing and sales were very excited about the notion of adding a coaster that had a gimmick or a thing that the park didn't have that could then be a marketable thing. So whereas they have, a sit down roller coaster, a stand up roller coaster, one that, below the track, one that goes backwards. So you could say that you had and that what the catch was is that they could say that they had the highest variety of roller coasters, or the largest variety of roller coasters in North America. It didn't mean they had the most. It just mean they had more types of experiences than anybody else. So so they decided that was a good enough reason to go ahead. I think, I won't say whether it was it worked out in the end or whatever, but the experience on the ride, certainly nobody's going to the park to ride that ride specifically. It probably still adds into their marketing collateral to say that they have that type of stuff. But that's an example where, sometimes other interests win out on those things. I mean, had it been a safety risk, then it definitely probably would never have gotten built. But the risks that it did, sort of have in terms of just, I said, cost of operation and maintenance time or whatever was not high enough, or the bar wasn't high enough for ultimately the decision maker at the park, or the decision makers at the park, to decide that they didn't want to go through with it. So they did. And there will be times where you look at your risks and nothing is entirely risk-free. So you have to decide whether you're okay with the risk that you're taking. And sometimes the higher risk, the higher reward, right, is what they say. But sometimes that's not exactly true. So yeah, that was kind of that example.
Well, and in this case, and I'll give another example, the financial risk in terms of it breaking down and the cost to keep it repaired also gets doubled on a reputational risk, because any business that has a bunch of things, of their attractions that are not operational, that plays into your reputation. When we were thinking about purchasing our arcade games in Brampton and in Mississauga, we did a lot of research. We're down at IAAPA looking at all the different games. We relied on our gaming, the game companies and distributors to really tell us what mix we should have in terms of what games were there. And one of the considerations is which ones break down more. And you do take some risks, because there are games that are finicky, I guess is the best word, and break down quite often. But they're high yield games. Everyone wants to play them. So you take the risk, and then you make sure that you have those parts ready to go. But if you've got, if my arcade, each of our arcades only has about 20, 25 games, if I had 4 or 5 of them down all the time, that's going to then not only have a financial risk of people not being able to play them, but the reputation that we don't have any games that are working. And I just need to go on mute for 1 second, because as you can probably hear in the background, the frickin' dog is driving me nuts. It's going to be one of those days, Mike.
Well, this is probably going to be it's going to be a challenge. Today's risk to the class is that we have my cat, Chuck's dog, a bad internet connection, just all that kind of stuff. So all right, so I think what we're going to do is, we're gonna move on from the Padlet in a second when Chuck gets back to his computer, and we're gonna start to look at these different categories, and I'm gonna try to apply kind of some of the lessons and learnings that I had in my own sort of projects, and talk about how we kind of approach those levels of risks, and and obviously the same thing, just chime in on the chat if you have anything to add or to say about it. Obviously there, the list of risks can go on and on and on, and there's going to be a lot of stuff in there. We're going to try to kind of keep it fairly high level and, get not too far down in the weeds, but so we'll go from there. So, all right, Chuck, do you want to bring us back to the PowerPoint?
Yeah, I can certainly attempt to do that. All right.
Okay. There we go. So we talked a little bit about that, sort of managing the physical or safety risk in a park, right? And a lot of it comes down to attention to detail, right? And so the first one, and we all picked up on in our Padlet, was your attention to maintenance and upkeep. And this is a really serious consideration for parks, and especially the more complex your attractions, the more expertise or skill you're going to need to draw into your organization to be able to pull that off. And whether it's using a third party, in some cases a lot of attractions are just too small to employ a full maintenance department, so you're going to use a lot of vendors and people to do that, but you're going to pay attention to those things. And there are quite a few systems in there that you can employ. One of them, which is used quite often in a lot of industrial and sort of settings where you have a lot of machinery and equipment, is what is called the CMMS system, which is a computer managed maintenance software. And so you have software systems, and I have one at work right now where we have every asset in there and we know what its maintenance intervals are going to be. So it much like the car example, where you need to change the oil every so many thousand kilometers, or you need to rotate the tires, or you need to do those kinds of things, that every attraction has its maintenance cycle. So there are daily, semi, weekly, monthly, annual, 5-year inspections, all those things. And so you need to keep track of those things. So, you have to employ some sort of system, and whether it's computerized or it's, it's just, somebody, making a calendar of things, or you have a daily check sheet or something like that, that those elements have to get done, because that's where over time, if you fail to meet those requirements or to sort of pay attention to those things, that's where failure creeps in, right? So, you can have a brand new ride and it'll operate quite well. But, some of these rides get pretty old. I mean, when you look at, Disney World, in Orlando, I think they're coming on 50 years. So some of those rides have been there since the beginning. Nobody owns a car for that long. I mean, the Dragonfire roller coaster at Wonderland, which, was the marquee attraction in 1981 when they opened, because it had 4 inversions, and now it looks like a toy beside the Leviathan that it's underneath. I mean, can you imagine building a coaster over top of a coaster? Well, there, but that ride is 40 years old, and so the amount of the diligence to maintenance and upkeep that you need to have to sort of keep something operating at a like new condition for that amount of time is quite considerable. So there's an investment from an attraction standpoint on maintenance. And even if you're not dealing with hard rides, your maintenance could be as simple as maintaining pathways, or clearing vegetation because it's blocking sight lines of a road crossing, or lights, if you're operating at night, or is somebody checking to make sure that all of the street lights are on and that they're working, and so it goes down, you get drilled down right down to the bottom. So it's it's easy to pick up on the big stuff, but it's the little things that always catch you at some point in time. And it could be application of non-slip coatings on floors, or paint, or those kinds of things. So your attention to your maintenance and upkeep, and that could be cleanliness, it could be storage of goods, all that kind of stuff is your number one way, obviously, of managing your sort of physical, your safety risk. If you're a winter attraction, are you salting your pathways? Like, you can take example of Canada's Wonderland running their winter fest attraction. And they're going from a park that always operated in the summer months and never had to think about snow clearance and ice and, you know, all that kind of stuff, going to an operation where they're going to absolutely have to deal with that, right? So you've got some of the grades in their pathways are not conducive to use in wintertime. So are you going to use it? Are you going to block it off? How are you going to block it off? Is there enough salt? All those things that you have to deal with, because those are the sort of small risks that you're going to get into and all the time. You know, I dealt with, you know, trips and falls where it was a simple matter of a paver. So one of those, like, you know, interlocking bricks was lifted out because it got heaved and somebody stubbed their toe on it and fell down. And, you know, so was there a program in place, you know, for you to monitor and find those things and deal with them before they became a problem? We talked about in our Padlet training programs. The training programs are huge in managing that, because that's where, you know, you're going to have all these staff, you know, in different areas of the park that are, you know, they're the ones operating these pieces of equipment. They're the ones telling people where to go, or ushering them through the attraction, or just giving instructions, or they're the ones that are going to be doing these daily inspections, or, you know, monitoring of the equipment. You know, when Chuck's staff come in, you know, and we looked at that video from when Ryan does his walkthrough of the Glow Zone attraction, you know, what are the things he's looking for? That's all training. You can't just hire somebody and expect them to know what to look for. So you have to be able to train them on how to, you know, what to look for and how to look for it. And is this a problem? Is it not a problem? Is it something that we can deal with later, or are we having to deal with it now? You know, and then, yeah, simple training stuff just about, you know, do they know how to operate this thing safely? What are the rules? What are the risks involved in this, you know, piece of equipment? You know, when you're dealing with lifeguards in a water park environment, the training is huge, right? Because in some ways you can't control all of the sort of physical elements of the park because it's pool and it's a body of water, and they're going to do what they do. But your training for your lifeguards has to be, you know, in such a way that you can manage that, or deal with people that can't swim, or, you know, or that have difficulty in all those different things. So quite a lot that going on in there. You know, we talked about auditing and inspections, you know, and that comes in a variety of ways. You know, your daily auditing, your inspections, your walkthroughs, having third parties like, you know, the people that you hire for training programs. Even sometimes you'll hire you know, people to come in that are just specialized in safety and risk management. I ran into a guy a few years ago. His job, and he has probably the coolest job in the world, and I would love to take it from him.
Is he a beer taster?
No, actually, so maybe the second coolest job in the world.
All right.
So his job, he was in the insurance industry, and he dealt with like large venues in terms of like stadiums, concerts, you know, that kind of stuff. And he built a lot of expertise in managing risk only because he was on the insurance side. So he dealt with every claim coming out of his clients, right? So he got to see where it all went wrong. And so, you know, and his current job though is he got hired by Major League Baseball, and his job is to go to every stadium that Major League Baseball operates out of and do audits and inspections of the stadium, and give the owners of those teams and the operators of those stadiums basically reports on how are they doing in terms of, you know, where are the risks, where are areas which they can improve, those kinds of things. So his whole job is just to give advice to, you know, the whatever it is, 30 Major League Baseball teams. So he gets to travel around North America, see a lot of baseball, you know, enjoy the game with the fans, but then walk each stadium, every part of it, from fan safety to the safety of the stadium employees, to even the safety of the players themselves. You can imagine that, you know, if there's a risk, you know, that, and you have a player that's making, you know, whatever they're making these days, $20 million a season to, you know, to pitch, the team has a very vested interest in making sure that they get from their locker to the field without wiping out or hurting themselves or having something happen, right? So, but that, that's a part of it, just that sort of auditing and inspection. So it can go from just very internal. So as an operator, when you're small, I mean, you're not going to be able to spend huge amounts of money to have people come in, but that doesn't stop you from being able to do it yourself, right? And, when we saw those videos, the first thing that any operator did was walk their attraction before anybody was in it. And that's all part of that auditing and inspection part, right? And, we had programs where, we would sort of train our supervisory staff to do these walks. If the park opened at 10 a.m., at 8 a.m., we were out walking the park, and we would walk up and down every inch of it, up and down the stairs, checking railings, checking these things, and making reports. And then we would mix things up a little bit, so that, because one of the things that happens is when you're in an environment all the time, you get used to the way it is. And so that your lens, your filter becomes adjusted to what you're seeing. So if, let's say, that gate is a little creaky all the time and the latch doesn't quite work, but that, so it's okay. And, or like, this is just a little off, but that's okay, because that's the way it always is. And so what we would do is switch it up and have people that work in different parts of the park go and walk someone else's area and give them, their notes and say, here's what I saw when I was walking through here, because I don't come here every day. And you would see things that the other person wouldn't see. A broader example that would be, we would send managers to different parks. So when I was working at Canada's Wonderland, I would spend 2 weeks at Kings Island in Ohio, and I would work along the team there. And part of my job while I was there was to audit the park. And so we had our standard operating guideline for Paramount Parks, and we would apply that against what they're doing down at that park. And I would, talk to the operators, ask them questions, say, hey, what do you do about this? What's your policy on these things? And then some of it was just work with them. So I'd work a shift, with the operators at different attractions. And then at the end of my 2 weeks there, I would present what I saw to the general manager and to the operations director of that park and say, hey, you guys are doing a great job in these areas, or these are the things I saw. But then sometimes I'd be, all right, well, what's going on here? Sometimes it was just an interpretation. So they interpreted the, certain part of the SOP a certain way. And so they would operate a certain way. Whereas maybe at our park, we were doing it differently. So then it would start a discussion, or sometimes it would highlight somewhere where they're not being completely, compliant with that SOP. And so that would drive that change. So it was a way of internally monitoring ourselves and just constantly checking and evolving and making sure those things go on, because it just doesn't stop. It's the biggest sort of part of your job. So you got something there, Chuck? I thought you were trying to weigh in.
No, sorry, no, I'm just adjusting. My hips getting sore. I've been sitting for 4 days.
Okay. And then
my only comment was, I wish I had paid as much attention to my own personal maintenance and upkeep as Wonderland did on the Dragon Flyer or Disney did on Space Mountain, because
exactly
they're running a lot better than I am.
Yeah, I mean, there's some of those old rides. You could look at it and say, how in the world does it run for so long and because it's attention to detail, right?
And look the same. I don't look the same.
No, well, there's something about metal doesn't, rust never, I believe, what was the
rust never sleeps.
Rust never sleeps was the very famous comment from somebody. But yeah. His comment was true that, you can't sleep on it because it won't sleep on you, is basically what the thing was. So, and then the last part was code compliance. So we've gone in the last, few weeks between sort of Ontario regulations to design standards and things like that. So this is where, you need to be, if you stay true to local and sort of industry codes and standards, then you have a better chance of managing those risks. And I think this probably, harkens back, and Chuck and I, we spent some time when we were planning this lesson of talking, like trying to say, we want to give some examples of real world happenings, things that happened in the industry that are they're informative, they educate, they're not always painting the industry in its best light because you're getting them on their worst days, or you're getting some of their worst operators. We kind of juggled about how to approach. There's one particular incident at a water park, and I think I mentioned it before, and how to kind of approach it in a sensitive way because it's fairly graphic. And I'll leave the research up to you afterwards if you want to dive deeper into this. If you don't, then don't. But there's a park called Schlitterbahn, and I mentioned it before, and it was built in a jurisdiction in Missouri that had no internal like state regulation on amusement devices. So there was no requirement to conform to any code of any kind. You just built it, and you were sort of internally liable for what you did. So if you could find someone to insure your park and do your thing, then you're good to go. And Schlitterbahn, they designed and built their own rides, which again is a bold choice. Depending on what your expertise are. And none of the people, I will say that most of the people that designed and built these rides were what I would call hobbyists at the best, because they weren't experts, they weren't certified engineers. They were kind of like how I am with IT, that I know how to make most of it work, and I'm bold enough to play with electronics and networking and computer stuff, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Well, that's kind of how they were. So they built this ride called the Verrückt, which is, I think it's German for insane, I believe is the word, or something in that, right? Yeah. But it was the tallest, fastest water slide in the world, and when it was built. And the process of them building it was, well, it was Verrückt. It was insane. They did not apply any of the ASTM guidelines or anything else like that. The ride was literally built on trial and error. And there are videos of them, and Chuck can attest to it because we talked about it last night. We saw some videos where they just kept basically trying things until it kind of worked out. And
worked out sometimes. Right?
Sometimes, yeah.
But rafts flying off, not with people on it, but in the test phase, just flying off the track and plummeting hundreds of feet. I said to Mike at one point watching one of these videos, these guys were like the Tiger King of the water park world. It's a crazy group of people.
I'm sure, I think Tiger King is probably the most applicable of sort of a comparison, I think, in that level. And the short end of it was that they sort of went through their own internal testing. They decided when they were happy enough with this ride, and obviously for them, what happened was there was internal pressure from them because they had invested quite a lot of money in building this attraction and had created quite a bit of hype, and people were coming from all over the place to go on this attraction, and it was obviously delayed and there were problems, but they kind of slapped it all together. And when they got to a point where they felt that it was safe enough, then they opened it, and it ran for, I wouldn't say a long time, probably about a year and a bit, I think, if I remember correctly. And I'm sure that they had issues all the way down the line with it, but ultimately they ended up killing somebody on that ride, and in a very graphic and horrific way. And and yeah, I'll leave the details for you to find out on your own. But it was a child, and this was an example of recklessness and just not applying any of the codes or standards to building a ride. And ultimately, where their biggest failings was that they decided that because of the issue of the rafts coming off the ride, that their fail-safe to that was not to change the design, but to add some sort of net barrier on the outside of the ride that would keep you in the flume, so that if you somehow got ejected or your raft came off of the track, that you would get, you get caught in this net, and that would keep you from falling, whatever it was, 100 feet to the concrete below or something like that. But the part of the ASTM guideline and design standards talks about clearance of these types of, like, you can have nets and guards and fences and railings, but they need to be designed in a certain way, and they need to be a certain distance from the passengers on the ride, and they didn't follow any of that, and unfortunately in that case the rider struck the barriers that they put up. So the barriers they put up were, that they put up with the intent to enhance the safety, became the actual instrument that this person got unfortunately killed by. And another issue that they had in the thing was there's a restraint standard. So what does a restraint is the device that locks you into a ride, right? So you can go on a roller coaster and you have a lap bar or some sort of shoulder restraint. Well, they kind of built their own sort of Velcro-y type of thing, which wouldn't have conformed to anything, but it was more like a band-aid. And they basically didn't want you getting ejected from the raft itself, so then they built this sort of Velcro seatbelt thing that, over time, Velcro is not a great thing to use for a seat belt, because Velcro, as I'm sure you're aware, sort of loses its effectiveness over time, especially when it's wet and it's being opened and closed hundreds of times a day. And that failed as well. So, but that's an example of where an operator, their motivations were other. They wanted to push they thought they were pushing the envelope in the attractions industry, and they took a very big risk, because they were building something that was very attention getting, and it drove a lot of business to their park. But they opened the door to safety risk that was, for most operators, would have been unacceptable. And they were willing to roll the dice is basically what they did, and they lost. And unfortunately, somebody lost their life because of their decisions, and it's still being litigated, and it's going to the courts and all that kind of stuff. But that's an example in the industry where not crossing your T's and dotting your I's, and being and following these guidelines and being aware of them ultimately caused a park to have risk. And that Schlitterbahn Park itself never really recovered from that incident, and they kind of got broken apart, and they're owned by different operators now. And some of their parks were all of their parks were actually pretty good. They just sort of made some really reckless decisions. So
well, and then when you talk about risk, and then some of these owners, you can get some personal risk, right? If you're the one that put your signature on, let's get this thing going, then there could be financial personal risk or actual jail time personal risk.
And in Ontario the same applies, that the TSSA Act does hold. There are penalties for operators that don't comply to the regulation, and they can include jail time, in as much in the same way that in sort of occupational health and safety legislation in Ontario, an owner operator can do time for things, especially if you're grossly negligent or if you're fraudulent in your practices. And I've signed a lot of documents in my career that say I attest to that I understand what I'm doing here, and that that I'm assuming that I've done my due diligence in going through all this process, and that I'm not submitting something that's falsified or is that less than complete. And I'm putting my personal reputation and sometimes my own freedom on the line if I and I've had moments where I've had to say, okay, we're stopping here because I'm not satisfied because my name is going on this document, and before we do it, I'm going to be completely happy. But anyway. I think we should probably take a break because we're at 9:20. So we'll call it 9:30, 10 minutes. Does that work?
Yeah, I'm good with that. Is everyone else okay with that? Do I see some thumbs up or comments? Okay. Well, Brittany, if you're good, I'm assuming everyone else is good. All right. We'll see you in 10. All right. So is everyone back, or anyone back?
If you're not here, raise your hand.
That's right. Oh, we got 2. 3. Look at that. That's awesome.
All right, you want to jump us back into our PowerPoint here, Chuck?
Oh, yeah, I could probably do that. Let's see here.
All right. Yep. Okay. So before we kind of move into reputational risk, I think, the last little bit I want to say about safety risk is that, it comes in all forms, and, it will, as I mentioned before, it kind of extends out to we'll say the big ones, where you see it in the news about, fatalities and injuries and all that kind of stuff, all the way down to the little stuff. And, as a park operator, you've got to look at all of those little bits and pieces, even some of it like cache security was something that we looked at the development of, of Wet and Wild as a water park about, how do we move money through the park and safely, and where do we store it and all that kind of stuff, because anytime you introduce that into the equation, then there's an element for criminality or even risk in that case, in physical risk and harm. Look at things like security systems and CCTV and alarms and that kind of stuff. There are examples of people obviously breaking into amusement parks in the off season and getting injured because they get access to that. So those are all liabilities and risks for an operator. So when you start to look at that, you can go down the rabbit hole quite deeply. So, but you need to look at what you're doing in terms of your attraction, its scale and its scope, and to determine the level of investment that you need to cover those things off. The security apparatus for a large amusement park like a Disneyland or something like that's going to be quite massive in comparison to Glow Zone that has no actual security department, but you have physical security. You lock your doors. You may have an alarm system, cameras, that kind of stuff like that. So it just depends on what your need is. So you determine what you need to do in terms of your own operation. So,
well, when you talk about Disney, people think it's the most magical place on earth or the safest place on earth or whatever. And behind the scenes, it's not like there's people that don't go to Disney to steal. So people feel so safe, they leave their strollers and their belongings there. And there's a whole slew of undercover staff who walk around just to make sure there's no one, just sort of picking a wallet up here and stealing something there, right? Just to make it part of that overall experience. You never see it. If you're not looking for it, you won't see it. But when you start to go to these places and look at it through an operator's eye, you're like, that's a staff member. That's not a guest.
Mm-hmm. And that, in the early 2000s, amusement parks started switching over to sort of, from a security standpoint in the wake of, 9/11 and all those things that, and in the States with the proliferation of sort of mass shooting incidents, that metal detection is a thing. When I started at Wonderland, there were no metal detectors at the main gate. Now, if you go to any big park like that, you expect that you're going to go through some metal detection. So it evolves, and people sort of assess risk based on what's going on at every facilities, and even sometimes not amusement parks themselves. So, okay. So reputational risk is the next one we talked about. And in our Padlet, we covered quite a bit of things here. And, the first comment I put up here is basically, you got to control your safety risks first and foremost. And because, you don't have to manage a bad reputation if you don't do the things that give you a bad reputation. So, I guess, it's like, don't start something if you don't want to have to answer for it. So, so that would be the first point to that, is that, some of these sort of one follows the other in some cases. And in this case, definitely if you're in an industry that's based on safety, then you better be good at it, because, everything else you do, you can't spin the message that hard. You have to have good fundamentals before you can manage your messaging. So, so that's kind of where I would leave it at that. Chuck, does that make sense?
Oh yeah. There are smaller things, and I think Knopf put it in the Padlet, something about on your second point, controlling the message is you know, if you get, so I think we use the example of the bad review because they were expecting the mini golf to be more intimate, right? So you get a bad reviews, and responding to that and explaining why you did what you did is a way to do some PR, you know, work, right?
Mhm.
So, and controlling
So,
that message.
yeah, and that's sort of that second point about, you know, controlling your message, right? So there are a lot of platforms out there where people will review and rate you, and you need to take heed of that. And there's a lot of ways that you can sort of aggregate that information. Even I think Google has business tools that you can access those things and respond to people, see what your metrics are, where you're going. So some of it is about, like, you look at those messages and, you know, you determine whether or not you need to react to them on a business level. So if you're getting a lot of comments about lineups or cleanliness or you know, just general, you know, things about your business, then you may have to make an operational change to it. Other things you may want to you know, how do you respond to people that are, you know, putting these things out for you on the internet for other people to read? You know, those sort of, you know, some of what I look at too is, okay, well, the reviews may be, you know, what they are. And as Chuck said before, you know, when people have a good time, they're less likely to review something than when they're having a less than good time. So, you know, some of it's about encouraging people to put positive messages up that, you know, and say, hey, if you like us, then, you know, tell somebody about it or do those kinds of things. But then how do you respond to the negative reviews? So what language do you use? How do you sort of, you know, shut those things down before they become a wildfire? You know, do you know, some of the operators, you can look at some of the Google reviews. Sometimes you see like an owner of a business sort of writing something and then you're like, oh, they just made it worse, because, you know, it always feels like a personal attack, right? When somebody says something bad about your business, right? And so how do you control that and control the message? You know, other parts about your reputational risk is, like I mentioned before, if you are solely built on a certain demographic, or that you want to attract a certain demographic, then all of your messaging and the way that you approach things needs to lean in that direction. So if you're a family park, then be family, right? So your messaging, how you deal with things, what you say, even your posts on social media, whether they're you know, TikTok or whatever, that you're using music that's appropriate for children, or your visuals, you know, you're not showing activities in the park that would be contrary to the image that you wanted to show, or at your attraction. You know, at Glow Zone, you know, Chuck wants to be, you know, sort of, you know, a family friendly, or a, you know, sort of, we'll call it a PG level experience, right? That it's wholesome, that you're going to go to it. So he's not, you know, in your marketing or in your, you know, Facebook posts or your Insta or your TikTok or whatever else like that, you're not going to have, you know, people, you know, doing things that would be considered adult activities, right? Or that, you know, you're not going to have, you know, go-go dancers up on the countertop or something like that in bikinis doing their thing, because that's just not your message, right?
Yep.
So control that message. And then when things happen at a park, large parks have very specific protocols and procedures on who speaks for the organization. And that's a really, really important point, because you're gonna, like, if you're a large park, you have thousands of staff. And so if something happens, do you want them all to talk about that? Do you want them, you know, if the media comes knocking at Glow Zone's door, let's say, you know, does Chuck want the guy that's running the laser tag to be the guy? Or do you want them to know that you got to call Chuck because, or Ryan, or whoever is that person that is the face and voice of the organization? So that's part of controlling that message. And, you know, large organizations always have like a public relations officer or somebody who's that, and it's very clear that, like, if those things happen, this is who's going to speak for it. They may not be an expert, and they may be getting information from other departments saying, okay, can you explain to me what this was? And they'll distill it in a way that that can be easily understood, but that you want to control the message. And the way you control the message is by making sure that you designate who that person is. And, you know, I think later in the class we talk about like an EAP, emergency action plans, and in all of the action plans that I've ever sort of had a part in building, there is a section about communication and who talks. Like if there's a fatality on the site, if there's a major incident, an occurrence, or something that's newsworthy, who's going to be the person that's going to get in front of that camera and talk, and you're going to be, and that's really going to be important, because I think, you can look, online, and you can see instances of, public relations disasters where, the wrong person got up in front and, maybe they're exasperated or something like that. I remember an article I read back in 2018. I had to chuckle a little bit because it was like a water park somewhere in Western Canada. I won't give away the whole name of it, but they had a series of injuries on a slide, and it was fairly poorly maintained. And there were some pictures of this slide, and it was kind of delaminating and coming apart. And the media talked to I think he was the operator or owner, and his comments were basically like, well, it's really hard and we try our best. And, what do people want, like, for, this is a really old slide and it's good. And it just, the language was like, you're like, are you kidding me? Like, and so that's, obviously an example of how not to control that message.
I was just thinking, Mike, maybe I should stop sharing and pull up the WKRP Thanksgiving clip.
Oh, the turkeys.
Yeah.
It's a great one. I mean, that's a great example of it.
Okay, here's a good example of, and obviously fake, but a good example of what not to do. All right, let me see if I can find it. And because it's American Thanksgiving, it's very
it's appropriate.
Yeah.
Yes, I always wish, a lot of companies I work for are US based, so there's Thanksgiving this week is always a bit of a fun one because they all disappear. But then I always wish them a happy Thanksgiving, or as we in Canada say, Thursday. And
okay, I'm going to share this. Make sure the sound is. Share the sound, and off we go.
All right, fellow babies, and now it's time to go to our live remote man on the scene at the Pinedale Shopping Mall for the big WKRP turkey giveaway. So, take it away, Les Nessman.
This is Les Nessman, your man on the scene here at the Pinedale Shopping Center, where the excitement is mounting. We're here to witness the big WKRP turkey Thanksgiving giveaway.
Hey, you got permission to be out here?
What?
You're blocking my store here, buddy.
Don't you know who I am?
Huh?
I'm Les Nessman. I won the Buckeye News Hawk Award last year.
Good for you, Buckeye. Now get out of my doorway.
I'm sorry. Creep.
So far, so good, huh?
I'm here with hundreds of people who have gathered to witness what has been described as perhaps the greatest turkey event in Thanksgiving Day history. All we know for sure is that in a very few moments there are going to be a lot of happy people out here. Now the crowd is curious but well behaved. And I think I hear something now. The crowd is moving out into the parking area. And oh yes, I can see it now. It's a helicopter. And it's coming this way.
A helicopter?
It's flying something behind it. I can't quite make it out. It's a large banner. And it says, Happy Thanksgiving. From WKRP. What a sight, ladies and gentlemen, what a sight. The copter seems to be circling the parking area now. I guess it's looking for a place to land. No, something just came out of the back of the helicopter. It's a dark object, perhaps a skydiver plummeting to the earth from only 2,000 feet into the air. Second to the third. There's no parachutes yet.
Those can't be skydivers. I can't tell just yet what they are, but...
Oh, my God, they're turkeys! Oh, Johnny, can you get this? Oh, they're crashing to the earth right in front of our eyes! One just went through the windshield of a parked car! This is terrible. The cars running around, pushing each other? Oh, my goodness! Oh, the humanity! Oh, people are running about. The turkeys are hitting the ground like sacks of wet cement. See, folks, I don't know how much longer the crowd is running for their lives. I think I'm going to step inside. I can't stay out here and watch this any longer. No, I can't go in there.
Children are searching for their mothers, and oh, not since the Hindenburg tragedy has there been anything like this. I don't know how much longer I can hold my position here, Johnny. The crowd.
Les, are you there? Les isn't there. Thanks for that on-the-spot report, Les. For those of you who just tuned in, the Pinedale Shopping Mall has just been bombed with live turkey. Film at 11.
As God is my witness, I thought turkeys could fly.
Anyway, there's a good example of public outreach or community outreach and a good idea gone horribly wrong. I'm sure that some of you might have seen that before. If you hadn't, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I have over the years watching that. Let me go back to sharing the PowerPoint. All right.
Okay, there we go. All right. So yeah, so like we just manage that message, right? Have a person, and make sure that, you have a plan in place too, that if things go wrong, that it, what you're going to say and how it's going to be said, so that you're not, just sort of reacting to those things. The other point, strong business ethics is certainly, in any industry, and attractions is no different, that, you need to operate ethically. And, and that means, that you're following all of the laws, rules, guidelines, the standards of the industry. The example of the water slide incident before, that safety one, also was a reputational risk in the end for that company. And it came about because they didn't employ a strong ethic in terms of their operation, or that would be kind of my opinion on it, is that they cut corners. They took risks that weren't needed, and in the end they didn't use the standards of the industry. They decided that they were going to go on their own, and maybe that was ego, maybe that was something else, but it was definitely not ethical in the way that they handled themselves. And if you're a business that cuts corners, or decides that the bottom line is more important than other things, then you're going to open the door to risk. Sometimes maybe it works out for you, or it works out for for quite some time, but eventually those things come back to you. So in all of the organizations that I've been a part of, one of the sort of tent poles that we apply is that we are going to do things the right way. We're going to be ethical. We're going to be, we're going to follow the rules. And, and sometimes following the rules is hard because it puts up barriers to the end, right? It doesn't make it a straight line. It makes it more of a curvy line. But in the end, that helps you manage your risk in terms of your reputation as your business, and ultimately may keep you in business, or may at least keep your conscience clear if things were to go wrong. So and community outreach, I think, is the last sort of part about managing that risk. So reach out to the public that you serve, or that you want to serve. Know what they want, engage with them, make it personal. Sometimes, like, even in the branding or whatever, you can sort of say, well, like a regional park may say that it's Ontario's or Canada's or Toronto's, whatever, and it makes it it makes it part of the community fabric, right? Where people believe that they're engaged in that too. And, and part of your research too, about knowing what people want and like about you. So reach out, ask for feedback, ask for comments. Lots of parks do surveys that, whether it's in park, sent to, if you buy a ticket online, you may get a link to click on something. Just, what did you like? What did you not like? What would you like to see us do in the future? Those kinds of things. So understand who you serve and what they're looking for, and and set yourself up for that. So if you're, I come back to that notion, if you're going to be a family park, then make sure that you're talking to families about what they want to see there, and what makes them comfortable coming to your facility. Is it the level of safety? Is it the attention to detail? Is it the customer service? Is it the products that you serve? The music you play in the park? All those things kind of fall into that different thing.
Yeah.
So.
And then, another way, just sort of on all of that, like you audit from a safety perspective, where you send people in and you audit the actual physical plant that your attraction is. You can also audit your staff and your safety to make sure that the public relations and the messaging is going to protect your public relations. You have like all sorts of mystery shopper companies where you can employ people to come in and audit what was the experience like from a guest perspective, a guest service perspective, and that can go a long way for organizations.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of organizations will call it different things, like member point of view or guest point of view or different things like that. But really, in the end, it's about that sort of, auditing yourself or managing your messaging so that, that experience is what you think it's going to be. So, okay. We talked about environmental risk. That comes in a bunch of factors. There's a picture of a very rainy, empty water park there. And, that in the water park industry, weather is your biggest environmental risk, right? Nobody wants, it's kind of funny, when you think about this sort of, the situation that, people, even if it's hot, people don't want to go to a water park when it's raining, even though they're going to dip themselves in the very same substance that's falling from the sky. But if it's raining, you're not going to be busy. If it's sunny and clear or hot, then you're going to be busy. And so, some of it's about, you have to understand that that's an inherent risk to your business. You can't control the weather. So you can't put guards and controls in place to deal with it. But you need to understand it and know that it's a risk to your business. So some of the things and we've talked about the Disney example, and in our Padlet, we talked about diversifying the activities in the facility if you can. If you're a water park, then you got to stay true to yourself, right? But you're going to put in some stuff there that, if they have, rain during the day, or maybe a thunderstorm that shuts your attractions down for a period of time, that you have things for people to do while they're waiting. And that could be, food and beverage or retail opportunities or, entertainment shows, arcades, things like that, just so that people have something to do, when those weather activities happen. When you look at the ski industry, they need snow, and how do they manage that risk? Well, they invested heavily in snowmaking technology to keep themselves going. All kinds of different ways in which you can look at it. You also have to manage it from a standpoint of safety. Lots of parks use services, whether they're sort of third party or in-house. For example, at Wet 'n Wild, we paid into a service that gave me detailed weather forecasting for that region of where the park was, and it would come up right on my phone, and any director that I gave it to, they could have information about what are the sort of hourly weather conditions going to be. So is it going to rain? Is it going to get hot? When there are thunderstorms approaching, we had rules about proximity of lightning to the park. So if there was lightning within so many kilometers of the facility, then you needed to shut down certain attractions, and this would be the same for like roller coasters and things like that. If you go to Wonderland and there's a thunderstorm, they're going to start shutting down rides. And in the old days, you'd be just, you'd stand on a hill and look and see if it was coming. It's much more sophisticated now. So we were getting real-time indications of whether there was going to be any activity of note, where it was, how far away it was, when it was going to arrive. And some of that kind of built into our messaging too at the park, where we could give park guests a certain amount of notice that their weather conditions are approaching, are going to change to a certain way, that we're going to have to do some things to shut down rides. And whether that was at when you drove up to the ticket kiosk and you were about to come in, that somebody can say, hey, just FYI, we're probably going to get a thunderstorm in the next hour or so, which is going to require us to close some things down, and it's going to last for about an hour. And that made the decision for somebody coming in, whether they wanted to wait or maybe they wanted to further visit, those kinds of things, because then you didn't have to deal with that upset person. But you also had this sort of safety factor so that you weren't waiting for that random errant lightning strike before you started frantically shutting things down. We could get an alert. Everybody got an alert. We were standard on our procedure about, okay, these are the things that are going to close. There are messages that got played over the public address system that were pre-canned and announced to say, due to, local weather conditions, we're going to have to shut down out of an abundance of caution, do those kinds of things. So you sort of built in those systems that sort of helped you at least anticipate environmental issues as they come up. So those were some of the things that we did. Yeah, Chuck.
And then also just having your processes in place for making sure that there's nothing during bad weather that could potentially harm staff or a guest. So you've got A-frames everywhere, directing people to the kiosk or wherever. Well, what's the protocol? If we know it's going to be a little microburst come through, they need to be secured. The garbage cans need to be secured. All the lawn chairs. I went down to Cuba a few years ago, and my only job was to make sure that we went somewhere where there wasn't a hurricane, and I blew that. And they were in full hurricane prep. It didn't hit us, but it went up the east coast of Cuba. So, but their prep for all of their lawn chairs, they throw them in the pool, and I was like, that's brilliant. Because they're sunk to the bottom, and all that's going to happen is there's going to be a ton of wind and a lot of rain. It's not going to affect those lawn chairs. It was a really interesting way, but that's how they mitigated some of their environmental risks, right? They protect their property, protect their guests, and off you go. Mm-hmm. And then, and then on Ontario Place, another way that they mitigated the environmental risk of rain or a rainout day is they offered the weather guarantee, which meant that if there was a chance that it was going to be a rainy day, you might still go, because you knew that if it ended up being a washout, you were going to, as you left, you're going to get a free pass to come back again. And bet you there's a ton of people that only came on rainy days, paid the one time, and then came all summer long. And they were the people that recognized that, yeah, it's just rain, we're not going to melt, and got to bring their family for free all summer long, because they only came when it was raining. So they got in on a rainy day pass, and they left with a rainy day pass.
Yeah, definitely. And weather doesn't always, we always focus on kind of bad weather events. Sometimes managing your environmental risk is dealing with proper amounts of shade structures in your facility, because you're going to be operating in the summer. One of the biggest comments that I get, in working in sort of water park environments from guests is that they're always asking about how much shade there is in the park. And because it's important, because you're going to be there all day. And although you want it to be hot and sunny while you're kind of using all these things, because it makes it more comfortable, sometimes you just want to rest and you want to be out of the sun, or you need some shade space or whatever, because that, for a family, especially when you're bringing children to a park or facility, being in the sun all day is really hard and taxing on them. So that's an important thing that you manage in there.
Well, yeah, and then on top of that, you talk about good weather, managing your staff loads. So if you're on a random Wednesday and it's been raining on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, but you're staffed for a regular Wednesday, and suddenly Wednesday is beautiful at your water park, and you're prepped for 4,000 guests and 12,000 show up because it's the day. Now that's a factor of the environment that's caused these risks, which then cause safety risks and other risks.
Yeah, and
it all ties together, Mike.
It certainly does. Yeah, and I think, the last bit on an environmental risk is, that climate change is becoming a factor in a number of industries. I read an article a few years ago about the ski industry in the sort of northern US, and how that the line, there's sort of like this imaginary line of like, whatever, latitude of kind of where it becomes a viable business entity to operate a ski resort, or a winter sort of, even a winter attraction like a snowmobiling or cross country ski or some. There's an idea that like if you're below a certain like latitude, that you wouldn't even try it. Well, that line kind of stayed static for a long time, but now it's actually pushing northward. So there are operators that find themselves on the wrong side of that line now. And so they're needing to reimagine their business, because that's an environmental risk to them. Because maybe right now they can get by, but in 10 years time, 20 years time, if what people are anticipating or forecasting happens, that it's going to dramatically change how you do your business, and you need to be able to look and anticipate that.
Yeah, you just when Mike and I were growing up in Ontario, there was no such thing as possums in Ontario, never, because they don't have any fur on their hands, and it was too darn cold. But now there's possums everywhere because they're migrating with the line. I think there's no scientific proof to that. That's just my
that's Chuck's personal observation.
That's my personal observation. Exactly.
Yeah,
they're creepy things.
They are, but they're good. They're apparently they're very good pest controllers themselves. They like to take care of nuisance animals.
Well, that's good.
So, but yeah, I wouldn't want to keep one as a pet.
No.
All right. So then the last one we talked about was managing financial risk, and the concept of that. And in our Padlet we hit on a lot of these things. So I mean, you guys are pretty much experts at this already, but it's and we're gonna go into some budgeting and stuff next week to talk about sort of how the finances kind of work and how you sort of set those things up. But the obvious things are have a sound business plan before you start. Nobody just opens the doors to an attraction, whether it's big or small, that there's got to be some planning and thought, right? About, okay, well, what does this look like? How much money are we going to charge for a ticket, and someone going to pay that? How much does it cost to actually run an attraction? There are a lot of hidden costs and things you don't think about until you're well into it. And then the numbers start to add up. It's kind of like, home ownership, where you think that it's just the cost of buying the house, but then it's the cost of paying the realtor and paying the lawyer, and then there's the mortgage costs and the insurance and the maintenance and all these other things that factor in, that sort of add to the cost of that thing. And this is very much the same in the attractions industry. So have a good plan that's laid out and has considered all of those things, and is able to weather some of these other risks above, in terms of environmental risk. If you're a seasonal operator that relies on the weather, then every once in a while you're going to have a good season and you're going to have a bad season, and those things those become things that you need to manage. One of the sort of strategies that gets employed by large organizations is that if you have a diverse number of parks, let's say you operate more than one park, and they're across the entire sort of North America or Europe or wherever you're situated, that you're in different markets, and sometimes some parks will be up and some will be down, and you kind of set it up so that if one of the parks is lagging behind because it's having a tough year because it's rained all the time, or the weather's just not conducive for them, that chances are someone else is having a better one, and so those things can spill over. But you need to have a sound plan on that. Controlling your expenses. So, watching the bottom line. So in operations, I think we talked way back when that we don't generally generate the revenue, but we certainly spend it. And so, and there are costs that you need to factor in about, your sort of maintenance, supplies, equipment, labor, vendors, licenses. It just goes on. And you need to be able to manage that, so that, and the biggest manageable costs that you're going to have as an operator are labor and supplies. So, supplies, you gotta, you're looking for good, good deals, good vendors, good, a good use of your expense money. So, and you're not buying too much or too little of anything. So you're not having, if it's toilet paper, then, you're making sure that you have enough that you never run out. But at the same time, at the end of the season, you don't have 4 warehouses full of toilet paper on your books, right? And a lot of parks, the biggest challenge for seasonal parks is how to get rid of that, that inventory at the end of the year, especially if it's consumable. So, when the food service managers at the parks are getting near the end of the season, they have to be very careful about their inventory, because some things can hold if you keep them refrigerated or frozen. Mostly frozen goods or non-perishables, you may be able to use them the next season. Other goods won't be. So you want to manage those inventories, because you don't want to pay for something that you're never going to be able to sell or to use. But yeah, your labor cost is one, in terms of your scheduling, and a lot of the parks, we kind of used an attendance based labor model. So we forecasted how the park was going to do from week to week, and that was built on information we got from ticket sales, so online ticketing, weather forecasting. So if you know that you're going to be busier on certain days, group sales. So knowing that, you have sort of money in the bank already, or you have this many people, so that you plan your level of staffing based on what you anticipate your attendance to be. And if those things don't work out, do you have a way to sort of scale that back quickly? So if you thought you were going to be busy on a Saturday, but all of a sudden the weather turns, how do you unwind that so that you're not, carrying the staff volume, the number of staff that you would need to serve 5,000 people, when ultimately you're going to end up with 500 or something like that. So all of those things are controlling your expenses. Limiting your liabilities. So, limit those liabilities and those other forms of risk. So look at those places where, you're going to get dinged. So, whether it's higher insurance premiums because you have a lot of claims, so if you have a lot of trips and falls in your facility, or, maybe your claim volume is high, then an insurer is going to charge you more on a premium because they're paying out more often for you. Or, if you have these, reputational risks that affect your business, then you're going to lower your revenue. In water parks, it was one of water quality was always a number one concern, because in there are certain sort of waterborne illnesses or things that you can get from improperly maintained pool water. And if you had an outbreak of something like Cryptosporidium or E. coli in your facility, then you can pretty much guarantee that your entire summer is going to be a write-off, because it's going to get in the news. And no matter what you do, that some parent or mom or dad, or who's making a decision whether they want to bring their child to this facility, is going to look at that and go, look, you can sort of think about some industries that got really affected by COVID because of the people's perceptions of risk changed. And the same thing if you don't control your liabilities on the other side. And then at the same, if you have a lot of incidents in your park, you're going to end up paying a lot of money in settling those claims. I mean, those insurance claims get settled. When people, trip, fall, if you have a catastrophic injury or a fatality in your park because of an accident, those things will cost you money, whether they're penalties from, regulators, the TSSA, or, anybody else, or just you're going to be paying out a lot of money, to your insurer, through your deductible to pay off those claims. So,
and if it goes to litigation, it costs a fortune just for the lawyer. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So like just as a just to have the lawyer to help fight it or negotiate the settlement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think even just a simple sort of a labor level one, like if you end up like like human rights tribunal thing,
Yeah.
That'll cost you. I think on average, I think it would run you probably $20,000 to $30,000 to settle something like that, and it could be something very trivial that you could have headed off with training or procedures or policy.
Yep.
We had an incident at Ontario Place where we were at the Human Rights Tribunal, and it cost us a fair bit of money, and it was all about breastfeeding. And that an employee in an area had made a comment to a mother who was breastfeeding her child, and it was innocent enough in that, but they basically ended up causing a human rights issue for the park, because that person took their complaint to the tribunal, and there was a cost in we had to get representation, although you're not required in the Human Rights Tribunal. But if you're an organization, you probably want to have that. And then at the end, there was some level of claim that needed to be paid out, and then there was also a training requirement that had to come out of that, and that cost money. All of that cost money, because if you want to train your staff, you got to pay them and all that other stuff. So that claim, that simple like employee saying something that at the time they thought was fairly innocent and innocuous, sort of comment, was just really misdirected, and maybe it was a lack of training or their understanding of sort of the where the world is right now in terms of how we deal with those issues, that that cost the company quite a bit of money. So that was definitely a financial risk that maybe could have avoided with just a little bit of training at the beginning, or a policy or a procedure that wasn't written down. And then lastly, you're sort of, we'll talk about sound business fundamentals, right? So, you're managing, you're making good decisions about what you're doing, right? You're putting in product that people want, you're charging the right amount of money, your cost of goods, your margins are all appropriate, and you understand those things. So you're not trying to, you're not trying to make, you build a $30 million roller coaster, but you're charging people, almost nothing to get in. I'll say, when Ontario Place had its free 40th anniversary thing, that was not a sound business fundamental. That was a government decision. And so they decided, they knew that that was a financial risk. They knew that it would hit the bottom line. But this was, it was a government decision about optics. And it was about, we're going to give some back to the thing. And, as we talked before, the government has somewhat of an unlimited pot of money. So they're sometimes not quite as acutely aware of financial risk as other organizations. But certainly that hit the bottom line. If you're going to give it all away for free, but you're going to still operate nonetheless, then you're going to lose money.
And it was certainly one of the causes of its ultimate demise.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Now you're starting the following year with nothing in the bank, and asking the government to fund it. And they're like, we don't have any money, but you just gave it all away last year.
Yeah, it kind of was like a self-fulfilling prophecy for them in the end, because then they're like, well, look, it's a money loser. And we're like, well, because you made us not charge any money for anyone to come in. But that's a story for several beers at some point in time. So
yeah. Okay. I think we're just going to push through, Mike.
Yeah, I think so too. So all right. So so what I wanted to sort of end this conversation out is wanted to talk about two particular incidents, and maybe get a thought from the, you can put in the chat what your thoughts are on that. But and I tried to pick two sort of examples that were fairly quick for us to go through, that highlight some of the things that we talked about.
And then in the chat, as we're going along, what we'd love you to do is sort of give your thoughts on what type of risk management failed in these, and how. Is that what we're hoping for, Mike?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
So all right. So I posted a link there too. If you want to go on your browser, you can go to, like, it's a very short CBC article. I think it's about like a paragraph about this occurrence. And back in what year was this in?
I think it was 99.
99. I remember that summer, because it was the beginning of a lot of change in the province of Ontario in terms of regulation and monitoring of amusement devices. And this is there were several accidents in the amusement park industry that year in North America. This was one that was local in Toronto, and certainly got the media talking, and then got the TSSA, I'll say, a little bit on the hot seat from the government, and saying, okay, what are you doing about this? So the wave swinger, and the picture of the ride there is a wave swinger. So a lot of you have probably seen this ride before. Lots of parks, fairs, and that have it. It's usually called the swing ride or something like that. But its manufacturer name is the wave swinger. So if you wanted to buy one, you're going to go out and look for a company that sells the wave swinger. And I think they're built by Zierer, is a company out of Europe that does it. And this particular ride was operating at the CNE in the summer of 1999. And I think there's about 30 or 40 riders, I think, on one of these rides at a given time, and they're all on these swings. And the idea is that it lifts off the ground and then it kind of rotates, and that top umbrella thing kind of has a tilt to it. So you get a little bit of an up and down motion as you go around. And inside the ride, the way it raises up is there's a series of cables and pulleys that basically get pulled by a motor that basically stretch that sort of centerpiece out to make it get taller. And during the operation of the ride on that particular day, the cables that were inside that ride broke. And that caused the ride to drop to the ground and down to the position that it would be where you would get on the ride. And so while none of the riders directly impacted the pavement, they dropped rather suddenly, and the stop was obviously just as quick because the ride would sort of kind of bang into itself, and you can kind of picture like a cylinder just kind of compressing on itself. And so there were quite a number of injuries. There were no fatalities, but there were quite a number of injuries. And obviously in sort of EMS in Toronto sort of standpoint, when you have that many injuries, that would be sort of a mass injury event. So it would bring in a lot of attention, a lot of media, a lot of ambulances, and that kind of stuff. Obviously there was an investigation done on it. And in the end, it was determined that, yes, the problem was that these cables failed. They determined why the cables failed. And the reason the cables failed was that the operator of the ride had just replaced them that summer with new cables, which is not unheard of. I mean, everything needs to be maintained and replaced. The trouble is that the manufacturer of the ride, as I said, is based in Europe. And so buying parts for them is expensive and it takes a long time. So if you wanted to buy a new set of cables from them, you really have to plan this out. And let's say you've found a problem with the cable, and that means that you can't run the ride until you get these cables. It could take weeks, and you're going to pay a lot in shipping and duties and freight. And obviously you're buying from it's kind of like buying car parts, right? If you bought your original Toyota parts as opposed to ones from AutoZone, then you're going to pay more money. Well, they found a local supplier who said that they could supply them with cables that would meet their standard or expectation, and they installed them. And obviously they saved a whole lot of money and a convenience and put them in. And it was determined that these cables failed. So in the end, this is where I kind of put it out to the group for some comments, is what in terms of the levels of risk that we talked about here, sort of where do you think the breakdown happened here? What was the mistake that was made?
And you can go off mute if you want to just chat too. Uh-oh.
No. So anyone want to take a stab at it?
I mean, you said it was the ride operator, like, so you're talking about like
I'm like the company that like these are like a fair attraction. So the owner, like you can think of like you own this device, it's yours, you maintain it, you operate it for profit at these fairs, right? You charge money, that kind of stuff. So, what level of risk did they not consider when they made this decision that caused this occurrence to happen, in your opinion?
There's no wrong answers. There we go.
Well,
all right.
They obviously chose like to save money and then what's the word I'm looking for? Sacrifice like safety or the quality of the actual product they were purchasing because it would be cheaper and they'd probably get it quicker.
Yep. Yeah, that's definitely, and I think, you hit the nail on their head there, right? So the bottom line was that they were operating in what they believed to be a reasonable fashion. Their mistake was that they kind of lost sight of, one very important thing was that, when I talked about cutting corners or looking for that cheaper option, sometimes that gets you down a rabbit hole and you make a mistake. And, one of the cardinal rules I'll say in operating and maintaining amusement devices is that never substitute is the rule that you need to go by. That, you know, they substituted a known set of cables. So had they bought from the original equipment manufacturer, they would have gotten exactly what they needed, right? Because the designer and the people that had built this ride, and as I mentioned, these rides operate around the world. There are probably thousands of these things, you know, everywhere, any corner of the globe you go to, you're going to see this ride. It is a staple at a fairground, and they don't fail. It doesn't have a reputation for doing this. That, you know, what happened here was that they used a cable of unknown quality, that failed. It didn't fail right away. It failed, you know, sort of weeks after it was installed, but it wasn't the exact part that they needed. And they were kind of given some assurances, or they were led to believe that it was, but it certainly was not. And so, you know, what was the ultimate outcome of this situation for this operator, the Midway company that was doing that? Well, there would have been quite a bit of litigation, right, in terms of the riders on the ride. You're talking, 30 or 40 riders all injured that are going to sue you. Your insurance is going to pay out, or your insurance may drop you because you all of a sudden did something that would be contrary to sort of normal operations. It focused a lens on the operator from the regulatory body, like the TSSA would have been all over these guys, and every device that they have in their fleet now would have been probably pulled aside and basically taken apart in every record. So it opened them up to a level of risk that in the end they saved nothing from spending less on these cables, right? Sorry, Chuck.
I was going to say, but they started the thought process started on the financial side. They thought they were mitigating financial risk by purchasing this other cable, because in doing so, they were able to continue to operate. They saved money, right? Increased profitability. They did all those things. So they were mitigating the financial risk that they would have incurred had they purchased the proper equipment, but they did so on the backs of safety risk, and they lost. Is in a nutshell. So it's definitely one that spanned two of the four buckets, and of course because of that, then suddenly it caused reputational risk on top of that, and not so much for the manufacturer, because the manufacturer actually came out looking great, because this never happened anywhere else in the world that was using the OEM, the Ontario, or what's that, the original
equipment manufacturer's
stuff. So yeah, definitely shows how decisions can cross buckets.
And this, and when we talk about the different sort of influences, I mean, the reputation of this operator and operators in general took a hit. And even I was at Wonderland at the time when this happened, and as I mentioned, it was a particularly bad summer for the attractions industry in North America, because there were a lot of high-profile accidents or occurrences on amusement devices, and the media was latching on to that. And Wonderland, their PR people had to get out in front of the media too, to talk about, because that exact same ride exists in Wonderland, and so we had to, the day that happened at the CNE, our process was, okay, we're going to close ours until we know what happened there. And so, the ride at Wonderland had to shut down, and then we sat back and waited for the TSSA and everybody else to do their thing, and then to basically, send out their findings and say, and the original manufacturer of the ride sent a bulletin out saying, there was a failure on one of these, so we'll let you know, if there's something that needs to change, because sometimes there's a failure on a ride like that, and they'll send out a bulletin to all the operators saying, check the welds on this spot, because one of our operators noticed a crack or something that potentially could become a problem. So it was the same process, but reputationally, the sort of fair industry in Ontario took a major hit because of something like that, right? And caused a whole ripple of change. And the TSSA is the way it is kind of right now. And in this was sort of a triggering incident to actually drive the TSSA to where we are currently in terms of our level of inspection, certification, and all those kinds of things because of this particular issue. Because of one person deciding to use a cable that was cheaper and locally sourced, right?
Yeah.
So, okay. The second one that we'll talk about is this is sort of an issue of an environmental risk. So Royal Botanical Gardens, another Ontario attraction out in, where is that? Hamilton, I guess it is. Yeah, so in Hamilton. And the story here is that there was a school trip that came to this attraction. The Royal Botanical Gardens, if you don't know what it is, it's a botanical garden. It's a nature attraction.
It's right in the name. It's right there.
Yeah, it's right there in the name. They give it away in the title. So they, but you know, it's a series of, it's beautiful actually. If you haven't been there, it's really actually quite nice, especially in the summer. Well, especially in the summer because that's when the plants are alive. But if you go in the summertime, it's, you know, they've got beautiful gardens and places to walk, and they're well manicured, and, you know, exotic plants and trees and all kinds of stuff like that. So this was a school trip to the botanical gardens. What are you saying? The comments here to inspect? It's a botanical garden.
It's huge. How do you inspect the whole thing? So we'll go through that.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. So, so anyway, there was a school trip. A thunderstorm popped up during the middle of the day, and this school group took shelter under a tree. And as you can see, this is not the picture of the tree, so you know, but the tree, as a result of the thunderstorm, part or whole, you know, all or part of the tree fell, and it landed on a child and killed them, which is tragic. And you know, but you know, I don't think people think about this sort of how much a tree weighs, but they are heavy. So a branch is like hundreds of pounds. And I think there's been other, like, I think there was one in a Toronto park once where some poor guy was just like laying under the tree and a branch just broke off in the wind and landed on him. And so that, you know, I don't want to terrify you about hanging around trees. They're generally very safe, and we have but in this case, the storm caused the tree to fail. And as a result, you know, tragedy occurred. So I guess let's think about this. So I mean, obviously this is an environmental issue. So was it under the control of the Royal Botanical Gardens? Did they fail to do something to cause this to happen? I mean, what's everybody's opinion here? Where was the failure, or where did things go wrong?
I think the failure was in the policy, let's say. So had from both sides, from the school and from the botanical gardens, that the message was clear: no shelter under trees during, you know, like weather conditions. That would never have happened. I mean, it was like protocols. You're not allowed to stay under like the trees when it's like there are thunderstorms.
Mm-hmm. You know, I don't even know why we're teaching you guys, because like you guys got the answers here.
That's right, and you're right, Talis. There is some onus on the actual leader of that class, for sure. It is a freak accident, and sometimes freak accidents happen. Mike and I lived through a microburst while we were camping, and you know, our family. We had our little kids. We were out in it at first because, you know, it was fun to be in the rain, and one of our friends had 3 tents on their site, and the deluge of water had caused 3 little or a river that snaked under each tent. So everyone was busy digging trenches, and then the microburst came through, and a tree and hundreds of feet, like it was a huge tree, just came right across on a 45-degree angle. And suddenly, you know, we're up, and the kids were we're getting them out of, we're intense, but we're running to the opening where the washrooms are, and we put them all under the structure of the you know, the public washroom that was in the middle of the provincial park. Sometimes you can't prepare for the severity of what's happening.
I believe the problem mostly is like people usually, act on like based on their instincts. So like instinctively speaking, if you are like under like a heavy rain, the first thing you will think of like find a shelter, the closest thing to you, and if that was a tree, then that would be perfectly fine. I mean, I've done it like I'm talking about myself, and I've done it like 1,000 times. And I always like after going under the tree, I just discovered that the rain gets heavier there because you get all the rain from the lead. It gets like even worse, but we do it anyway. That's the problem.
Yeah, it's instinct, right? So
yeah, but this is not an uncommon issue in attractions across the province, and there are industries within the attractions world that already have safety measures in place for these exact events, and golf courses are a prime example. So you talk about big enough, golf courses are massive, and they're outdoors, and people are very remote. And when weather is coming in, they put a siren off that goes right across the entire course, which means the golf course is closed, get inside, because every golfer knows that they don't want to be caught out on the fairways, and they don't want to be caught under a tree, because if lightning hits that tree, there's a good chance it's going to hit you. So there's already these standard practices that are out there that perhaps if the Royal Botanical Gardens had been thinking about that, they could have actually pre-installed those types of safety measures, those warning measures, and had a, like you said at the very beginning, had a process in place that said, if you hear this siren, you need to go to here.
Yeah,
Since
and
you
that's
bring
exactly.
sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead now.
Yeah, since you bring about the golf course, I always wonder how do they mitigate or control the incidents of like one of the balls actually laying on somebody's head. I mean, usually they throw them like really far, and you never know where these balls will be landing.
It is well. There's the onus is on each of the individual golfers. There's a universal call of four, right? If something is coming towards, if your ball is errant, but it does happen every once in a while. I hit a guy with a ball in a moving cart, and he was leaving the hole, and him and his whoever else was in the cart with him, and I'm a terrible golfer, and I was like, there's no way I'm going to hit it that far, and I just crushed it, and as the cart is going by, my ball hit the ground, thank goodness, hit the ground, bounced up, hit the top of the cart, and then hit him in the shoulder. And it's unfortunately, it is what it is. I bought him a beer, and that was that. But I don't think it happens as often as you think, because most golfers will leave enough space, right? Because
they have the luxury of space. Yeah. But I think it's a great example, Naf, what you bring up, and before we kind of get back to this particular case study, is look at what happened in recent years in professional sports arenas, Major League Baseball, National Hockey League, where years ago you would go to a game and the puck or the ball would enter the stands, and that was just part of the experience, right? And now, like, because of things that have happened, so learnings in people getting injured. I think there was a case in the NHL where a young fan was killed because a puck hit her in the head, where they adopt new policies and look at their level of risk and have installed netting, right? So if you go to if you've gone down to the Rogers Center to watch a baseball game lately, they used to have that net that was just behind home plate, because the ball kind of come really fast off of that. And those nets have been extended much further out. And at National Hockey League arenas, there's those nets that go all the way around the back of the rink. And they go really high up. So the chances of a puck actually leaving the playing surface and entering the stands gets smaller and smaller because of that. And that's a sort of managing of known risks and things that happen. But and I think, now if you hit the nail right on the head in terms of, what was the lesson kind of out of this particular example? And like I said, I tried to pick some that had I'll say, they weren't very complex. I mean, you can go into the internet and nosedive into all kinds of occurrences, accidents, things that happen at attractions that are much more complicated and need a whole understanding of the equipment and process. But this one, is a fairly good example of there was the Royal Botanical Gardens and the school group and everybody else involved had no impact on the weather. They could not, they couldn't change it. They couldn't, design when it was going to happen or where they were going to be when it struck. What was lacking perhaps, and, that's something that, you'd have to kind of dig a little deeper is, was there thought put into place of, could this potentially happen? And if that's the case, and obviously I would bet if you went to the Royal Botanical Gardens now as a school group, there's probably something in there about talking about what happens if the weather goes bad. Where do you go? What do you do? All that kind of stuff. Is back then there was nothing. So there was no instruction because nobody thought of it. Nobody working at the RBG sat there and said, well, wow, we better go warn these school groups. Like, it's an outdoor attraction. It's going to rain. And most people have experience with this, that it happens all the time. So, as you said, our instinct is to go under a tree or something for shelter. So they did that and it went wrong. And so now, this is a level of risk that they had to assess and say, okay, well, this is real. This is a real risk at our facility. It's a real risk at a lot of outdoor facilities because, trees, shade, structures, that kind of stuff. What level of instruction do we give people? So when I talked about Wet and Wild, when we know that bad weather was coming in, we had pre-canned announcements that went over our public address system, and they specifically told people not to take shelter under trees, tents, umbrellas, those kinds of things, but to go under structures. Or the park has, because it's a very large open space, we tell people your best place to go under really severe weather is back to your car. We'll allow you to re-enter the park, so go back to your car. Go sit in there for the 30 minutes that it takes. You're safe there in your car. And then when it clears, we'll reopen everything and we'll let you right back in. And that's something that people wouldn't normally think about because they're in a gated attraction. So they feel like they need to stay within the confines of that attraction. Or maybe, the staff, are in the water park, we're trained to, if there's a tornado or something going on, here are the shelter locations, and the change room building is one of them. So it's direct people to go into that large brick structure that would be, more appropriate than standing under a tree. Or we had this sort of large party tent that we use groups in. Obviously we don't want lots of people would go under it to stay dry, but the thing is it's built to handle a certain amount of, wind, but a tornado or a really strong storm isn't gonna, it may collapse. And if you had, several hundred people under it, then you're going to have a very large problem. But yeah, this is sort of a very quick sort of example of a level of risk that maybe they didn't think about there. Yeah. And I know a lot of what came out of it too was, they had to go like they did a lot afterwards too. They even had to hire arborists to come in and do a complete tree study of the entire property. And when you talk about a huge property like that, how many trees do you think are in a forest? So someone had to go then and do a tree assessment of every tree at Ontario Place, because we were a government facility. We were instructed by the government as well to do the same thing. So I had to hire an arborist at a very large expense to go and look at I think at the time there were over 1,000 trees on the property at Ontario Place, and every single one of them was tagged and identified. And I have this really cool map, or I used to have it, of every tree, what species it was, what condition it was, whether it should be cut down because it was showing rot or if it needed to be pruned. And, we used that later on, thankfully, because we had issues with the emerald ash borer at the park because that's a big problem in Toronto right now, is that, you know, ash trees are being, you know, taken over or being destroyed by this invasive species that weakens them and kills the tree. So if you have a dead tree somewhere, then you need to remove it, because those are obviously more prone to failure. But it sparked a lot, and from, you know, obviously the cost of this incident was very high. It cost a boy his life, which is, you know, the ultimate cost. But then from a financial cost, obviously, that there was quite a lot, you know, from the litigation to the sort of remediation and the inspection and all this kind of stuff down the line and building process and then all it was a simple thing about maybe, yeah, they had a process in place that, you know, warned people of a thunderstorm, and that there was communication to the teachers and knowing what groups are on the property and how to account for them to make sure that they're all safe.
Yeah.
and
Right. But until this, it really is just a tragic accident. But until the tragic accident happened, they probably hadn't have thought in a million years that they would have been facing the tragic accident. It's hard to crystal ball everything that can happen. And
Exactly.
and it's not just the attractions industry. You look at the automotive industry with recalls, right? So a new car comes out, and there's an accident, or, you know, engines are catching on fire, or something. It happens once. Okay, well, that's a, you know, they make note of it. It happens twice, happens 3 times. Now they're like, okay, well, this is now something that's a problem across all of the cars, and they do a recall. It might have been on the backs of several people's lives. And there's tons of stories in the automotive industry about putting profit above safety. And, you know, the recall was going to cost too much, so they thought there would be less to pay out the people who didn't survive.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and you know, that was that other example about the drop zone, right? No one foresaw there was a drop zone incident where there was an equipment failure that injured someone fairly severely, but it had never happened before, and it's never happened since. And the reason for that is, once it happened, much like Mike was saying, that all the swing rides shut down until we figured out what it was. The same thing, they figured out what failed to cause this accident, and then made sure that every machine that they had ever built across the world, they made sure it didn't happen. It was like almost a recall on the drop zone.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So. But yeah, I think, you know, both of these case studies kind of highlight 2 different sort of elements of risk. You know, in one, the risk was induced by, we'll call it a human failure. And in this case, the risk was induced by, you know, something that was outside of the control of the operator, you know, and, you know, you can kind of, you know, look and say, okay, well, there's a negligence on either part. And I think, you know, some of it is maybe more clear cut. In other places, this was, you know, nobody was being purposely like negligent. In the Royal Botanical Gardens example, this was, you know, the mistakes were made, and, you know, in some cases maybe you know, from the teacher standpoint or whatever, but, you know, nobody saw the occurrence. But then all of these things culminate in learnings, right, for the industry as a whole, where we take these things and we sort of look at them at our own property and say, okay, could this happen here, and have we done everything we can to mitigate this thing? Because, you know, you're not going to be able to control everything. There are going to be, you know, things are going to happen. You know, people are going to fall down. You know, people are going to hurt themselves. Sure. You know, as I mentioned at the beginning, the minute you open your doors to people coming in, then there's the likelihood of something happening is always there. And, you know, you hope that they're always minor, and but then you deal with them and learn from them, but sometimes they are not. And, you know, they're sort of learnings too. And, but, you know, I think, you know, hopefully these, you know, like I said, risk management in itself, I spend quite a lot of time dealing with it in my professional career. And, you know, certainly 3 hours in a PowerPoint show is not going to make you an expert or give you the entire breadth of all of the things that need to be done, but it gives you a sense of, you know, where these things lie, and, you know, where expertise, experience, and just keeping your eyes open, you know, and applying common sense, and sometimes just playing that what if game, you know, will lead you into places where you develop, you know, policy, procedure, and, you know, and you have to learn from, you know, other people's, you know, incidents and then occurrences. So, you know, sometimes, you know, those sort of industry magazines, and, you know, like even at IAAPA, there are quite a lot of conversations about risk. And, they'll sort of sit down and talk about examples of things that have happened and learnings from it, or what went wrong, and just going back against that. And every industry does that, right? It's kind of like, let's examine what happened here, and how could it happen here, and if it can, what are we going to do about it, or make sure that it doesn't. So
yeah, well, that's another example of how the attractions industry works together, right? They sharing best practices and new protocols that are coming out to mitigate this. Because once again, if everyone has to shut down their rides, or there's incidences, everyone is at reputational risk, which then leads to financial risk. So they all work together.
Okay.
Oh, all right, here we go. So let me stop.
Yep.
So we're going to give out the next assignment. Aren't you guys excited? Hold on one sec here. All right, I'll share the screen. All right. Okay, so we have, let me see if I can do the view to one page, 100%. Okay. All right, so for this week's assignment, which I've taken, some comments, will be due at midnight on next Thursday, not next Wednesday before class, because some of you said that you like to have the opportunity to ask us some questions and then rejig things if you need to. So we'll make it due the Thursday after next class, which is already December. Holy moly. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. You have decided to purchase your own inflatable attraction, which you will operate yourself at schools, fairs, and other large social gatherings as a means to make some additional funds. It'll be the first time you've owned a portable attraction, and you want to make sure that you are successful. So here's what we want you to do. We've given you a bunch of different websites that you can visit. You get to buy one. Do not really go buy one. But pretend that you bought one, because I think that's a lot of fun. So
well, you can buy one if you want.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But make sure you have a really, really sound business plan. Okay, so pick one, and then we want you to research the steps required to become licensed by the TSSA. And if you just put in TSSA inflatables into a Google search, a bunch of information will come up. Find industry associations and supports that are going to help you be successful. Determine the potential risks from the 4 categories we just talked about today. Mike, you'll notice that I changed this right during our 10-minute break to layer this in. So
you are just amazing.
I know. And safety, reputation, environmental, financial, and describe how you're going to manage them. And then develop a safety and maintenance schedule for the inflatable based on what you've learned. So the format, so we sort of want you to complete it in like a policy or procedure format. It basically just means like a long form. It's nothing too complicated. Separating each of the areas as section title, then putting the information below in sentences, bullet form, charts, and diagrams, like you were writing a manual, basically. So the section titles could include, and we're not going to be overly prescriptive, product description. So putting a picture of what you've bought along with the specifications and like everything you can find on it. So have that there. Your TSSA approval, safety and maintenance schedule, risk management, and then as a bonus, and this will just be added to your score up to 4 additional marks. So then we're using a rubric again, is put together a budget. And we're not even going to tell you how to do it, but just start thinking about how the heck would you determine how to be successful at this? What would you need to break even, and what would you need to earn a living of $50,000 a year with this inflatable? And then the same submission instructions as the last one. You guys were very good at figuring out how to upload them, and thank you very much. It made it easier for us to find them and review them. Now let's stop sharing and let me go to the rubric. Because we did the rubric up already. There we go. Let me just share this. Screen 2. Okay. Okay, so we're gonna mark you on this how you did your spec sheet. That'll be the first thing. You're gonna be on the TSSA stuff, so providing clear, right? Your safety and maintenance schedule, your risk management, and then a list of your business, as a business owner, the supporting organization. So listing out those organizations. We aren't putting into the overall score the 4 additional points that would go to your attempt to do a budget. What we'll do is when we do the final adjustment mark, we'll put in the overall comments what we gave you for your budget. My question to everyone is, once we do a rubric, you guys can see them, right? Like if you went onto the website, could you see this right now?
I did. I saw the last rubric, so.
Okay, so I think it's published, I would assume. All right, I'll double check. Email us or text us if it's not. And that's about it for this one. Is there any questions about that? Any concerns? Any excitement for having to do yet another project? Hopefully you'll be able to employ some of the creativity you did in the last one. I don't think we did word counts enough, and Brittany, but you know, just if think about who your audience would be if you were doing this for real. If you're writing out a manual, you want it to be clean and concise and you know, to the point. So you don't need pages and pages and pages. You need to just be, you know, this is what we're doing, and you know, this is how I want to do it. And my stupid dog is barking again. I'm gonna okay, Mike, continue on here.
Yeah, so yeah, as Chuck said, we're not looking for like a volumes of information here. You know, think of it, you know, keep it to the point. You know, do a good treatment based on, you know, kind of what we've talked about. You know, we've in sort of that high level conversation. You know, the idea here is, you know, think of it as like, you know, you're just, you know, you're rolling around in your van and you've got this inflatable, and you know, it's not that much more complicated than that, right? But you want to make sure that, you know, in the back end that you're giving, you know, treatment to all the things that you would, you know, sort of, as we mentioned in terms of, you know, your safety and your licensing and your procedure on that. But, you know, don't overthink it. Just, you know, and, you know, in the same way that you guys, I think, you know, did with the last assignment, I think, you know, kind of use that as your guide to kind of the level of sort of the quantity of information that we're looking for in terms of that. So just have some fun with it, you know. You know, maybe it'll spurn you into a lifetime business of, you know, doing children's birthday parties with inflatables out of the back of your trunk. Who knows?
Right.
You know, I mean, people make a good living doing that, so, you know, don't mock it.
No, it's very, very true. It's very true. All right, and then so next week, what we're going to do is
before we go ahead, I think it's not visible yet.
Okay.
If there is like an option, make it visible, invisible. I think it's not visible yet because I can't see it on the page, not on the assignment page, not on the content.
Okay. Have you published it yet, Chuck?
I think it's because I haven't uploaded it as an assignment. So once I upload it as an assignment, which I'll do right off. Well, I've got a meeting at 11. So after sometime today, I'll upload it as an assignment and then assign the rubric to it. I think that's what you're right now. That's probably what I had to do the last time. And I'll make that happen. So by the end of today, you should be able to see it. And if you cannot see it by the end of today, then let me know. And the other thing I will do is I will also email you all the assignment itself, so that you've at least got the hard copy of what the assignment is.
No worries. Just like to confirm, we do have this one and then one more, right? So,
yes, but the one more is the one that we gave you a couple weeks ago.
The one where we're coming up with a business idea and do everything that we learned.
That's right. Yeah, the cumulative task really is what it is, and that we gave it to you much earlier because we figured you're give you more time to do it. So this is the last assignment that you're being assigned because you've already been assigned assignment number 4 a couple of weeks ago.
No worries, but we still have to do a presentation on assignment number 4.
Yeah, we'll talk about that next week. You know,
no worries.
And we'll see. Well, I would like to actually, if we could, but that's one of the reasons we want to meet in person on week 14. That's when we would have everyone do the assignments.
No, we want, if we want to meet, we want to meet just for the donuts and the coffee.
Well, okay, fair enough. Fair enough.
Is there yeah, that's I like your thinking there, Knopf. I mean,
Yeah.
let's go.
Yeah.
Donuts.
Right. Well, so you know, because we only have, like, next week is week 12. We only have 3 weeks left, right? So we're gonna build out a budget ourselves. So be prepared to be thinking and interacting through the chat, because we're gonna build a budget live, and we're going to we're gonna pick an attraction, and it'll probably be something similar to what I've done, because I've built out budgets for it. And we're gonna be pretending we're opening a new business, and how do we determine if it's viable, and what are all the different variables we have to put in, and then how do you plug in the numbers, and how do you do all that sort of stuff. So it'll be a fun week of finance, and well, at least I find it, you know, as someone who likes to make money and never does, but likes to think I'm going to, it's a very cool one. The week after, what we're doing is we're lining up some guest speakers, and we'll bring people in to talk about their operations experiences, and what we'll do at the end of next week is get you thinking about questions that you want to pre-populate. You know, you'll send us some recommendations of questions, and then we'll guide these conversations through, and you'll meet some additional people who are pretty well regarded within their rightful industries. And then the last week, knock on wood, once we get some confirmation from you guys that you're okay meeting in person, we'll have those coffee and donuts while perhaps we're doing some presentations. Right, because what we found, and the reason we've gone away from the presentations, to be honest, is that first week, that the first assignment when we had them do it, it's hard to do a presentation when you're not in person, right? And we thought, well, we can mark what you're doing without you just regurgitating it back to us, and that gave us some more opportunity to regale you with additional stories and information. So hopefully you've found it useful. Mike, any last minute words of wisdom?
No, I think yet another good week. I think
yeah, it was.
I hope you guys.
It was a slow start. Just if you forget about the beginning, just, you know.
I'm already moved past that. I'm like, we just knocking it out of the park now. I mean, the internet's working. My cat's gone. It's just been a great last like 90 minutes or.
And we got 3 minutes and 30 seconds of Les Nessman. You can't go wrong with WKRP. So
they look so dated, and oh my gosh, yeah. So
yeah,
but still quality. But anyway, no, I think I hope you guys, you know, once again, you know, learned something, or at least that it gave you some moments to think. You know, well, I guess we'll go onward from next week, and then yeah, same thing applies. If you have questions, or if anything that we've talked about, or assignments or whatever, you know, it's kind of piqued your interest and you want to know more about it, then, you know, certainly reach out to either Chuck or myself, and, you know, we'll either answer it or point you in the direction where you can find more information on it.
Yeah, perfect. All right, so on that note, have a great day, everyone. I know that this is you still got a lot more classes today, and I hope all goes well. All right.
Have a good week, everybody.
Okay. See you later.